Thanks everybody. My name is Jonah Brucker-Cohen. Thanks to Golan for inviting me and Catherine here. It's really great to be here with everybody. And so, can you hear me? There you go. Okay, so today I'm going to talk about some of my work first, and then Catherine will talk about hers, and then we'll talk together about the Scratch-Art Challenge, which is a workshop we're going to do here tomorrow. Yeah. And that we've done around the world. So to start off, I just want to talk about some of my work, and it's related to this topic of deconstructing networks, which is what I did my Ph.D. in recently. And just to start off, I like this quote because I think it's a pretty interesting kind of way to look at it. It's by Tom Standage, who wrote a book called The Victorian Internet. He says, time-traveling Victorians arriving in the late 20th century would no doubt be unimpressed by the internet. They would surely find spaceflight and routine intercontinental air travel far more impressive technological achievements than our much trumpeted global communications network. And what he's talking about here is this sort of shift we've been seeing recently, but sort of between telegraph, which is kind of on the left side, where you have more of a fixed infrastructure network. You have a specified location where you actually have to go to get to network, and then kind of your connectivity depends on the network infrastructure itself. And on the right is a phenomenon that sort of started in the UK and sort of moved over here called bluejacking, where you're kind of walking by a shop with your phone on Bluetooth, and these stores kind of send you an ad or something on your phone, or people can use it to like pick up people on the trains and stuff. But basically, the difference there is that instead of that fixed infrastructure, you now have a mobile infrastructure. Location doesn't matter anymore because you're wandering around the city, kind of independent. And also, the device is kind of, your connectivity depends on the device. It's not only the network infrastructure itself, so devices can talk to devices, and it's kind of more of a kind of mobile situation. So I'm kind of working between these different contexts, and I'll kind of give some projects, talk about some projects that I've been doing around there. So to start off, looking at sort of this larger theme of subverting network context, this is an earlier project I did called Internet Radio. We put a IP radio, it's a vintage radio that anyone can understand, and it dials IP stations. And let's talk about some of the projects I've been doing. Like first looking at network consequence. So what happens when you add something like a physical consequence to visiting something like a website, which is something we do every day, but we don't necessarily think it's going to have any effects in the real world. We'll also talk about social subversion. So when you take a system that everyone understands, like an online system, like an email list, and you change that structure of the system, how does it affect the social community around that system? Also physical displays, looking at how you can represent data in physical spaces, kind of out of the screen and into the real world. Wireless freedom and control, related to some of the projects here in this event, looking at kind of the rules of wireless access, wireless space, how they kind of can be challenged a bit. And then finally engaging with mobile devices and looking at how we can use something like a mobile phone as a way of socializing public space and not kind of making it sort of isolationist. I kind of see the mobile phone as an isolationist technology in a lot of ways, because if you're with a group of people and you get a phone call, you actually have to wander away from the group and talk to your friend on the phone. It sort of doesn't allow you to kind of engage with the group. So I've been working with ways of getting that engagement to happen. So this is an earlier project looking at social subversion. There's a project I did called Crank the Web. It's basically this large metal hand crank that you use. You basically enter a website and you use this thing to actually download the website by hand, actually crank the web. So it's a physical hand crank to the web. And looking at how something like transparent processes like bandwidth can be materialized, brought into the real world. Will kind of in the future, when everything is so automated, will that kind of edge us out of the equation? So it's kind of putting us back into it. And it's looking at a 3,000-year-old technology like the crank. How do we add that to something like bandwidth and downloading, which we think of as very recent? And it's very loud and kind of in your face, opposite of what technology is, kind of invisible. So this is kind of what it sounds like to crank the web. As you can see, if you did that every day when you're working, it's kind of insane. But basically, it's kind of looking at this idea of changing the whole relationship we have to networks and kind of technology and bringing it much more into physical space. Also interested in this area, I did a project called Alerting Infrastructure, and basically what this is this large kind of pneumatic jackhammer / drill, and basically it's connected up to a website. So whenever you get a hit on the website, it actually starts destroying the physical buildings. It actually starts causing damage to the building. And it's looking at this question of how a website relates to the physical space it represents. Because we have people visiting CME's site right now, but we don't actually connect to them, they don't know we're here. So how do we actually connect those two worlds together in a much more tangible, physical way? It also looks at how simultaneous visitors in online and real spaces can interact directly, and also are there consequences to visiting online spaces? We see deterioration in physical locations when there's a lot of people there, but online spaces don't break after 1,000 visitors. So like the Google search bar, the Google search button isn't going to fall off the Google page if 1,000 people hit it, right? So this is kind of looking at that connection. Here's a video that I made when I showed the project a few times. It's been installed this is in 2003, but I've installed it now in about 10 different countries and connected to different organizations. It'd be kind of loud. So. Yeah, it's kind of loud. Sorry. Yeah, so when you visit the website, you actually get a readout of how much damage you caused. So in this case, it tells you like the percentage of the damage that you caused. So it's adding this sort of like a bit of extra connection to what you did. Yeah. And it's looking at kind of how these physical spaces are really kind of becoming less important now than their online spaces. You know, people can set up a website without actually having a physical space. Sorry. In your face. But so this is the other thing. It's about technology being in your face, not just invisible, which a lot of this stuff is. Okay. So moving on from this project, this is my next version of the project, by the way, which I haven't made, but hopefully somebody will give me the authorization to do it. Let's see. Yeah, so moving on from there, I'm kind of also interested in how we kind of can subvert social systems to create new interfaces and new types of way people can interact. So this is a project that I did in 2003 for the Whitney Museum in New York called Bump List. And it's an email community for the determined. And when you join this list, it's an email list like any list you've ever been on. A lot of people have been on multiple lists. It's an email list that only supports 6 people. And when you join it, you bump somebody off the list. So to be part of this, you have to keep joining it. It's like kind of musical chairs meets email for that way. Basically what Bump List is, it looks at kind of what happens when rules are placed on accepted forms of discourse. When you change a system, everyone understands how does that kind of affect the community in that system. How do constraints and structures of a system influence the community? So this is like 6 people can join it. We had people that were so frustrated they were being bumped all the time that they started a Yahoo group list for people that were bumped so that they could keep talking. You know, we had people that we didn't actually have an archive because we wanted people to subscribe all the time, so somebody made their own archive and made their own stats page and made all their own stuff. But we actually ranked people on the site based on how many bumps, how many joins, how long they managed to stay on it. People are really persistent actually, so it's pretty amazing. It's looking at kind of how exclusivity and competition can change the modes of communication when you kind of make this structure a bit more constrained. Does it affect kind of the community on there? And then this is just a screenshot, I think, of kind of the homepage. You can go to it's bumplist.net. If you have a computer, you can try it out. You can see how long you can manage. A lot of people can't manage very long. So then after that, I worked with the guy, Mike Bennett, on another project that we kind of look at how we can actually manipulate the rules but make it much more social. So we developed this site called thwonk.com, which is actually going to go open source hopefully in a few weeks. What Thwonk does is it's sort of a social community for redesigning the rules of online communication. So we're trying to make it in such a way that people can then design their own lists, like Bump List, design their own kind of specifications of how these systems work. We're calling it user-generated social systems, or we're calling it Web 4.0, kind of skipping 3.0, because it's a little bit more kind of looking at the rules itself. So it takes into account what the current rules of online communication are, how they originated, you know, how do you subvert these rules to change how people communicate? What new forms of digital communities are possible by allowing people to design their own subversions? In this case, something like a bump list, where you have a typical email list, where you have like an open door policy. People can come in, they can leave, they can, you know, there's a public archive, and it's usually moderated by somebody. Whereas if you contrast this to bump list looks kind of like this, where you have people out of the list, and you have this sort of exclusive table of 6 people that when you join it, you then kick someone else off the table, and then they're part of this community. So that looks at kind of how it's a bit more kind of structured in that way, but it also adds this sort of constraint rule. So moving on from there, I'll get out of the screen world into the physical space, and I worked on a project, part of this larger project called Carnivore, that was started by Alex Galloway in New York, where basically the FBI was going to set up a system in 2000 after September 11 in order to kind of snoop for suspicious activity on ISPs in the US. And Alex and Radical Software Group, his art community, set up this free software called Carnivore, which was meant to kind of give to artists to put on a network to see all the data coming by and then do interesting things with the data. So I did a project called Police State that was a physical client of how we could kind of manipulate the data. And basically what it did was you run it on a local network. It looked for any suspicious keywords it found coming through the web, such as terrorist, bomb threat, these kind of things. And it sent a command to a fleet of 20 remote control police cars that all kind of swarmed around on the floor, around based on what the data was coming through. So it's looking at kind of the reappropriation of data, how information can be represented in kinetic space, kind of off the screen into physical locations. Also, what strengthens this relationship between data and its physical embodiment. I have a video here from when I showed it in Rotterdam in 2003. And this video kind of explains a bit about kind of how the project works. You can see some of the screens. So I found a list of keywords online of like hot topics that the FBI considered to be dangerous keywords, and then mapped those to codes. And all the cars are synced to the same frequency, so they all move together exactly the same, although some of them are a little bit off because they get dusk, but you can see kind of that they're all kind of moving together. That's the coffee break, So it's looking around, snooping on the network, looking for keywords like terror, bomb threat, and then mapping them to, I found online a list of California state police codes for all of these typical kind of things. And this is software, really screwy looking because it's so long, but basically it's on the left, you have a map of LA County, which is relevant to the codes that I found, and then sort of how the cars kind of behave as they move. And then on the right, top right, you have all the data coming through. A lot of it looks like garbage junk, but a lot of it is text that could be read. And then you have the keywords and then the police codes associated with the keywords. So it's kind of this idea of reversal. It's using the keywords to actually manipulate the police rather than the police using them to find the criminals. So that was some shots from the opener. So moving on from there, I wanted to talk a little bit about some work I've been doing looking at wireless control in the city and kind of urban spaces. You probably notice when you open up your laptop in a city, you see like hundreds of networks pop up, right? A lot of them are locked, security enabled, and stuff like that. So this is a map of like a public park where you have all these wireless signals kind of going out into the park. So Boingo, Verizon, Starbucks, McDonald's even has Wi-Fi now. All these are kind of interfering. And in 2001 in Portland, there was a community group that set up a free network in a park. And Starbucks set up their network right here in their cafe. And what was happening was their network, the Starbucks network, was too powerful for the free one to compete with. And the free one had to shut down. So I started noticing this happening all over the place. It also happened in New York, where Verizon set up a network. So in 2003, I built this project called Wi-Fi Hog. It kind of looks at this problem and see how you can kind of challenge it a bit. Basically, it consisted of this device that's connected to it's a hardware connected to a portable video jammer, which is a jammer that blocks all signals in 2.4 gigahertz range, which is what Wi-Fi and Bluetooth uses. And some software on the machine that when you enter it, so that it was set up in such a way that when you enter a node, you can get access to the internet, but it basically only your packets get through, and if it sees packets coming from other people's machines, it turns the jammer on and blocks them completely. So the idea is that only you can use the network. The idea was that control can then come from a third party, So the person who maintains this wireless network can't actually control it. It's you're controlling it. So the project looks at kind of the larger question of kind of how, what's the acceptable use policy of public wireless. It's using an unregistered, kind of restricted license. It's not, there's no specific policy about 2.4 gigahertz. It's sort of open for use. And so it's kind of challenging how these systems exist in public space. And then Habermas is like an old theorist, but he talks a bit about kind of the public sphere, the social level, or how people are supposed to be on the same level in the public sphere. And I was trying to contrast this to Wi-Fi, where it doesn't seem like that's the case. It seems like monetary values win out over kind of open access. And do kind of these public networks kind of engender this rejection of hierarchy and sort of looking at how social stratification could be changed. And there's going back to 1862, actually, in the US, this kind of goes back to the Homestead Act, where the US had to put a law into place to kind of guarantee land, because when people were moving west, they would settle on land and other people would take it as they kept migrating. So this is kind of looking at how wireless could map into this land grabbing issue, which is another problem with it. So the way this works is basically you have people that are using the node, and the Wi-Fi hog, when it's open, it basically, when it's off, the packets go through, but when it's on, only your packets go through and other people are blocked. So it makes people think, and actually New York City Wireless got really mad at me when I showed this project, because they're like, you're blocking our networks. But they actually invited me to their office for some reason to talk about it. So it was pretty funny. Yeah, so it was, maybe we made them stronger in the end, I don't know. Okay. So then in 2007, I was looking also at kind of public wireless and how you have all these paid nodes in places like airports and hotels. So I built this project that's a kind of another offshoot of an open source project called Ping Tunnel, and this is called the Wi-Fi Liberator. Basically what this does is it's an open source package of a Mac app with another wireless card, and you run it on a server and you run it on your client, and when you kind of connect to a node which you can usually has a portal page, like you go to Starbucks or you go to these places that say put in your credit card, you can connect to the network, but they want you to put in money. This uses a routing layer that goes around all of that security, sends it to a server, and sends your HTTP traffic back as through a ping packet, basically, which these typically networks let you do. So it allows you to basically make these networks into free networks. And the idea here with the software is that you have to actually rebroadcast your network, your free access to other people. It's kind of like Robinhood, I guess, meets Wi-Fi. It's like take from the rich and kind of give to everyone. So Wi-Fi Liberator looks at kind of how does redistribution of access models alter social dynamics of public Wi-Fi? How does it kind of bring this into public space? And why should economic barriers limit connectivity in public spaces? A lot of these paid nodes are run by telecoms that are making money off of cell phones and other things, and usually the Wi-Fi that they're trying to give you in these situations is not a huge moneymaker for them. So I'm kind of curious about when you open these networks, it really adds these sort of interesting creative possibilities for engagement. When you would have these networks open, it would really kind of allow more people to connect and create some interesting interfaces and stuff. So the way that it works now is you have this sort of a closed node use where if you paid, you can access, but you didn't pay, you can't access. And then with a liberator, basically what happens is you then become the node, and then other people connect through you, and you can kind of broadcast it out. But it came with a caveat where you actually, in order to use this, you actually have to share. So there's no way to do it just for yourself. You can't just take it. So I wanted to include that as part of the software. Okay. So then also looking at mobile stuff, basically I did a project in 2003 called Simple Text, and we used basically mobile phones and an audience to create a performance project where people in the audience would bring their phones to the show, they would send an SMS to a number that we set up, and then that message would then generate a live audio-visual performance from their input. And so basically Simple Text looks at kind of the collaborative potential of these devices. Because like I said earlier, I see them more as an isolationist kind of thing when you're in a group. So we were trying to make the group more social using devices. And also looking at text-based communication rather than voice-based, and trying to see how the strength of those communications can kind of fit together. And looking at kind of how interactive sounds and images can manifest on a public scale when everyone's a contributor. So you don't only have an artist up front who's kind of feeding out to the crowd. Actually, the crowd is then generating things. And how does personal space become public space? So here's a video about this project.
Simple Text is a collaborative audio-visual performance that relies on audience participation through input from mobile devices such as phones, PDAs, or laptops. The Simple Text project looks beyond isolated usage of mobile devices. The audience inputs messages which control the visuals and music. The purpose of the performance is to allow large-scale interaction through anonymous collaboration with immediate audio and visual feedback. Simple Text encourages users to respond to one another's ideas and build upon the unexpected chains of ideas that may develop from their input. Simple Text runs on network laptops and an internet connection with a sound system and 2 projectors for output. Simple Text creates video loops of web-searched images which create a moving collage of audio-driven visuals. Simple Text is a generative music system driven entirely by inputted text. Simple Text displays a scrolling status screen. A synthesizer also speaks the messages as lyrics. The music monitor on the right gives clues as to how input text is mapped to music change. This allows an attentive audience to take control of the music. A Simple Text performance lasts up to 60 minutes and can end with a recap of images and text phrases from the entire performance. Simple Text is a rare example of an interactive piece designed for crowded public spaces.
There's some more info about this project on the website. It was a collaboration with me and 2 other Irish artists, Duncan Murphy and Tim Redford, that kind of had different expertise in those areas. And then Tim and I worked also on this project that looks at kind of how you can engage with mobile devices in the city using sound as an output. It's called Inquisitive Devices, and basically we built these kind of birdhouses that sit kind of outside on the street, and when you walk by with your Bluetooth enabled on your phone, they actually pick up your ID and then start talking to you. So you're kind of adding your ID into a sentence, or a question, something like that. And just looking at kind of how dense these devices are in public spaces and kind of how we can interact with them and how we can get people to kind of interact with other people carrying them, what potential conversations could occur between people inhabiting these spaces, and kind of how strong is our dependence on these devices. Is this a good thing or a bad thing? Because a lot of people don't ever turn their phones off. I don't know how many people here actually even turn them off. So it's basically kind of looking at this question here. I actually have a demo too, but I don't think I have time for it. But maybe if there's time at the end, we can do it. So I can do that later. So kind of looking at concluding this, and then Catherine will talk about her work. So looking at this methodology of projects that I've been doing, I'm really interested in this idea of how when you kind of increase all these different ways we can connect, there's all these interesting relationships that can happen. So from phones to the web to physical interfaces that connect to the web. This is somebody trying to attack Google. But basically, also interested really in kind of how the aesthetics of interaction is more important than interface. So kind of what you bring to the interaction, how you kind of experience the interaction. To me, that's more important than actually designing an interface. It's kind of the social aspects around interface. Also, a lot of these projects really amplify metaphors in order to deconstruct conventions about how networking work. And so I'm interested there in kind of playing around a bit and seeing what possibilities could occur. And then finally, when you look at kind of how you can alter rules of network interaction, really interesting forms of engagement come up from that.